There we go. All right. Thanks everyone for joining today's lecture. Today we have Professor Michia Hibino. That's
Woo!
He's going to be telling us the basics and the reasons why he became a software engineer, and if anyone else is interested in software engineering, learning what it's all about. All right, Michia, I'll let you go.
Okay, let me share my screen. And all right, let's see. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yep, okay, great. So this talk, I think, was titled Basics of Software Engineering or Intro to Software Engineering. Let me start by saying this is not going to be an intro to computer science or computer programming or a particular language. That's so large in scope that I decided to make it a little bit different. This is going to be more an intro to software engineers and what we do. An alternative title could be, what do Mike and Michia do when they're not on our Zoom calls? So let's start by tackling some terms that you've probably heard in different contexts: programmer, coder, hacker, developer, dev, software engineer. I'm sure that there are many others. They can carry different nuances, but for the purposes of this talk, think of them as pretty much the same. Let's take a look at some popular misconceptions. One would be that people are born as programmers. This was something that I was guilty of myself, thinking that friends of mine that I grew up around that seemed to be born with computers, that they were the only ones who would go on to become software engineers. And related to that is the thinking that all software engineers come from STEM backgrounds. I would say that many of them, maybe most of them do, but not all. And it's a field that is changing with a lot of demand for software developers. Another misconception, maybe propagated by Hollywood, is that they're lone wolves, that it's just a solo programmer. In reality, if you're a software engineer, you're working with other engineers, you're working as part of a team effort. A little bit about my own path into software, and there's no single pathway. There are other software engineers on this call who I'm sure have their own individual path, what brought them into the field. So for context, I didn't have a STEM heavy education. My college was a liberal arts college. I majored in sociology. I worked in media as a researcher, coordinator, producer for Japanese magazines and television that sought to do things here in the States. And then I went on to work as a public school teacher in New York City. And then I was at some point curious about what is code and what is coding all about. So I started dabbling into a language, and then I started using that language. In my case, it was JavaScript, to solve different puzzles, which are also called toy problems. From there, I started doing some online tutorials, and then at some point, I learned that there's actual pathway into finding work as a developer, and that there are these accelerating programs out there, immersive programs, which have largely popped up over the last 10 years in response to demand for programmers. And this is probably due to the rise of web development within programming. So I went to a coding boot camp. It was an immersive, about 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for about 3 months. And lo and behold, I was able to find employment. First worked for a cryptocurrency startup that was based in Brooklyn, but grew worldwide. I was maybe the 300th employee, and by the end of the year, there were 1,000 people. But then cryptocurrency had a bad year, and so I think the company shrank from about 1,200 down to around 400. Then from there, my project folded, and I came to work at Anthropocene, and as part of the numeracy group. So if you haven't been part of the programming world, you might wonder what we do all day long. One thing we do is we have meetings, kind of like this. We programmers are pretty accustomed to meeting on different chats. The team that I worked with before coming to Anthropocene was a distributed team with members in Dubai and Berlin and Paris, but they wouldn't really necessarily call those places their home. They were kind of nomadic. So we have meetings, often on Zoom. We spend a lot of time thinking about our tasks and defining them. Right now we're making this big push to do this on Asana, and you could jump into a project and just start coding, but often that won't go well unless you have a plan beforehand. We spend a lot of time reading documentation, reading how other code or other libraries work, so that we can figure out how to use them appropriately. And we spend a lot of time reading code, often rereading our own code, debugging code, which means fixing problems when things won't work. Oh, and we also write code. Now, notice that that's only one of several things. So people who are not programmers might think that we spend all day writing code, but we probably spend more time reading and debugging code than actually writing new code. So here are some things that are important to our work that may surprise you. Spelling. It's important to spell things correctly. If you misspell a word, your code may not run. If you forget to put in a parentheses or a semicolon, that could also break your code. So something like spelling is important. Giving things names, that's very important as we're writing code. It's important because you want to look back at code that you've written later and understand what something does, and if you give it a well thought out descriptive name, it's easier to understand and easier for others to understand. Writing code that others can read. This is also something that may not be apparent if you don't write code, but if you're working on a project, you are not really writing for yourself, but you're writing for the project, and that means that others need to be able to read and understand the code that you write. And also, if you leave a project, then others in the future would need to be able to read and fix problems. Writing code regularly is something I've learned is very important, because if you are learning a language, just like a spoken language, a foreign language, you need to use it regularly in order to keep up your ability. And same goes with code. Lastly, asking for help. If you don't understand something, you can't get something to work, you can be prideful or insecure and kind of bang your head for hours until something changes, but it's good to ask others, admit when you need help. A few less important things that we treat as very important, that we're very particular about, may seem like nonsense if you're not a programmer yourself. The tools that we use, the particular computer, its specs, the operating system. These are things that may seem ridiculous to others, but seem like life and death to us. The way we customize our tools, if you ask other developers, they'll have very strong opinions about not only the tools they use, but how they use them. And yes, our computer monitor setup can feel very important, to have our monitors in a certain way. The number of monitors we use, how they're positioned. So that sums up the main things I wanted to go over, but in my outro, software engineering, I wanted to go over some thrills and chills, things that are fun and not so fun. Yes, it was software that made that thing spin around. And we are in the Halloween season. I tried to find the nerdiest jack-o'-lantern I could. First, some thrills. Learning languages is fun. And if you enjoy learning to read and write, to speak other languages, you might feel some of the same thrill learning to code. Something that surprised me is that there, for me, is a very creative aspect to programming. And you're always learning. There's always more to learn. Things are always changing. Things are always updating. The teamwork aspect is a lot of fun. There is a lot of community and camaraderie among programmers. Now, some of the chills, some of the things that we have to face as developers, layers and layers of abstractions. What this is referring to is you might kind of think you understand something and you understand it in a small way, but then you have to figure out how it relates to something else, how it operates in a larger context. And even if you get that, then you might have to switch contexts and figure out how it works there. So there are many abstractions to wade through. Yes, there can be a lot of frustration working as a developer. Something seems like it should be working, but it's not. And this is something you have to contend with. Imposter syndrome is something that is fairly common among developers, something I've experienced myself, and I've talked with other developers who have this feeling of, well, am I really a programmer? Other people seem to be programmers, but not me. I wanted to end with some learning resources. If you are curious about programming and might want to get your feet wet, these are some free resources that have been helpful to me. Free Code Camp, Khan Academy, Code Academy is a tutorial site, and there are many others. Academy appears twice, and that's because there is a free version and a premium version, and a lot of the sites do offer some free material. And there's just a lot of stuff out there that you can get for free, and especially during a pandemic, that's probably even accelerated the amount of material that's out there. And I'd say if you're interested or at all curious, just start dabbling, and please reach out to me if you're interested in learning more. So that's it. If you've got any questions, or if any of the other developers on the call have anything to add to any of this, I'd love for you to chime in.
Woo. Yeah. Great job. Thank you very much, Michio.
Thank you, Michio.
Oh,
yeah, that was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Do we have questions for Michio or the other developers?
I do. What would be a good place to start? Would it be like JavaScript or C++? What would you recommend starting with in terms of job markets? What would be a good thing to learn right off the bat?
My advice, I mean, and this is just based on my experience, is JavaScript, because it is a language that is everywhere. It's a language that powers websites on the front end, meaning in the browser, what you see, and you can run it in your browser. I think all the browsers, Safari, Chrome, Firefox, have developer tools that you can just access through the browser menu, and you can write code and see how it runs. Because with languages, you need to have an environment for it to run in, and we all have a browser. Now, other developers might have other opinions, but another sign that it's a good starting language for me is that a lot of the coding boot camps teach JavaScript. Some of them are JavaScript and Ruby or Python, but most of them will teach some JavaScript because it's used in the front end, which is on the browser side. Any other devs want to weigh in?
I'll just add, yeah, JavaScript and Python.
Sounds good.
I'd add that Python would probably be better to learn fundamentals. JavaScript still has some. It has it's gotten better. I mean, it's gotten a lot better since inception. Mind you, this language was created in about 2 weeks, so there's quite a bit of quirkiness in the earlier stages of JavaScript that was like, confused many computer science people. And Python has a pretty good it's pretty good for learning like fundamental of like CS or coding. But yeah, you learn either one and you should be able to transfer the knowledge around.
How
Yeah,
long
yeah,
did
I'd agree.
how long did it take you to feel like you didn't have imposter syndrome?
Uh, it's an ongoing thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be lying if I, said I no longer have imposter syndrome. But the flip side of that is that there's always stuff to learn, which if you enjoy learning, is great.
Yeah, I'll second meet you.
Oh, Mike, how long have you been working in software development?
Yeah, how long now? About 8 years, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. When do you still also suffer from imposter syndrome, or?
I guess like in like some maybe some certain aspects that I'll be like, oh, yeah, I did that. Like it's like maybe like when there's like some new technology and I can't believe like, okay, I'm not even sure if yeah, every once in a while.
Gotcha.
But I mean, yeah, it's also something you learn to deal with on your own it's also personal, right? In a way. Yeah.
Here's a question for you guys. Do you feel there's a difference between working virtually, like the way you guys work, compared to if you guys were in the same location and you did, physical stand-ups every morning and kind of did your job? Do you feel that there's a big difference between that?
I guess like, in an office setting, I can just be like, hey, I need help with this or something. You can just like swivel your chair, and like, it's like when you're like stuck on something and immediately, just talk to someone about it, just to either work it through your brain, or
Mhm.
it maybe it's some verbal aspects that can't be conveyed through Slack. But I guess now we can we can hop on like a Zoom call. But yeah, there's still like a little bit of overhead, just yeah.
There's still a barrier. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. I think that there's definite value to being able to work together in person to bounce ideas off of each other. I would also add the caveat that even if you are in the same physical space, if if you and other developers are working on their code, sometimes it's not as simple as turning turning to the side, because that other person, or if that other person turns to you, you might be really deep in some kind of flow. And so when I've was working with other developers in Brooklyn, like there was often this communication code that you reach out to them on Slack to say, do you have a moment, even if they're sitting right next to you. And so programmers can like be in this do not disturb mode.
Oh yeah.
But definitely when they, when we're able to talk to each other, it's helpful.
But Michi, yeah, that brings up an important thing: flow. We don't like our flow getting interrupted.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, it's like
Okay.
this sort of state where you're just like focused. It's like a and then like you know, you're focused in like some sort of weird Zen way, and
Mm,
you just like it just everything just takes over. Your
Mhm.
mind just takes over your body, and you're just like spitting out software.
Mhm.
you're suddenly LeBron James on the basketball court. Got it.
All right, maybe not as great as him, but you know, you feel like him.
Yeah, yeah. I'd add that to the thrills category.
Okay. Is there something that you want to communicate to the rest of us in this team that who are not working on software engineering parts? Like, is there something that we can do to make your jobs easier when we ask for requests or features or when you're debugging something? You know, what's something that a lesson that uh, a lot of us who are not in a software engineer role right now, what can we do to make your lives better?
Hmm.
If you
Let's see. Uh,
don't,
was
Oh,
somebody going to pop
okay.
in? Mhm.
Yeah, like okay, whether it's a bug or
Mhm,
issue or a new feature,
mhm.
they have to be well defined. You know, they
Yeah,
can't be like just a one line task. It's like okay, so we have to search. We got to either go to you or search for more information.
mhm,
Yeah, sometimes we have to spend time like looking up information or getting on the same level about what we're trying to do because
mhm.
yeah, we may not understand what we're trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I'd agree. I'd agree that having context to perform the task or to implement something is very important. Um, to know uh, why it's important to do something, uh, how it will be used. That's all really helpful information.
gotcha. Yeah. Does anybody else have more questions? No. Okay, I have. I guess I do have one more question. With your background, with your software development background, for me, it's very important that you guys speak up when we're, thinking of a new project or we're working on something new because, a lot of the burden will fall on you for engineers to be able to build some of this stuff. Um, Now that you are, I wouldn't say a new engineer, but somewhat kind of new engineer, do you look at projects differently and have a very different insight into it because you're going to be doing a lot of the engineering portion of it? How does it affect your sort of strategic suggestions that you can give?
Um, so for me, uh, I know that I'm going to have to uh, do research into what's available and what is uh, the suitable tool, suitable way to implement something. Uh, there's no perfect way. You can reach analysis paralysis, but within the uh, scope of the project, the timeline. Uh, uh, for myself, it's often very difficult to estimate how long things will take. I think maybe for Mike, having spent more time in the field, would you say it gets easier? But yeah, to answer your question first, yeah, knowing that I have to look into technology and there are some things that I'll be able to answer more quickly, but often I have to do some research.
Yeah, Michi, to answer your question, it depends on the technology you're working with. If it's something you're familiar with, then you'll have a better estimation on it. But if there are unknowns, then you have to research, right? You have to reduce the amount of unknowns, and that's how you can get better estimation. And that just comes with researching and working with these certain technologies.
So,
That
okay, the
Yeah.
basis of my question is more because of your engineering background. I want you guys to be also to contribute ideas on things that we can do, right? Because
Hmm.
there are technologies that you're familiar with and you know what their features may be. One of the things we're trying to establish is like, oh, hey, we're trying to accomplish something and we want to be able to have a quick turnaround, get it out there. And with your knowledge and the technologies that you know of now, you know, um, have you contribute ways to accomplish those things quickly. You know,
Hmm.
that's so I think it's a very different philosophy. Maybe if you're working at Broadcom, Broadcom, they tell you, hey, we need this, you develop this, right? Here in our organization, there's this idea that we want to get out. How quickly can we get it out with your knowledge now? You know,
Mhm.
So then
so
we just end up using the stacks we're familiar with the most, right?
maybe, but I mean, some of the things that, like, let's say this nuclear website, right?
Hmm.
This was a very different. You're using the Google Map API
Yeah.
and the API. I don't things that you may not have worked on specifically before,
Hmm. Hmm.
but
Yeah, definitely
you,
not.
yeah, but you brought that. You know, you're the ones who brought that out. It's like, hey, I think we can do this. We'll have to learn it, but I think we can
Mhm.
do this. Like, it would be great for you to be able to provide that type of knowledge also for a lot of the rest of the group, so that they're like,
Mm.
oh, okay, this particular technology kind of works like this, right? Do
Hmm.
you think you guys can do something if I gave you a design that looked like this? You know,
Yeah, I mean, I
so
think we go back and forth on what the
mhm.
feasibility of certain things, right? It'll be a collaboration among all of us, uh, to giving engineering feedback and giving product feedback. I think, yeah, it's just a back and forth, right?
I think
Yeah,
so.
I
That
think this also works well with our move uh, to incorporating sprints, because then we have, in our case, we're doing 2 week sprints, so we'll have boundaries, and uh, we'll find some implementation by that time. You know, we might improve upon it in the next round, but this gives us a structure for uh,
mhm.
building something and improving it incrementally.
Also, time to research on
Mhm.
technologies.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Does anybody have any last questions before we end this session? Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this week's Let's Learn Something New. Michia, great job on the presentation. Thank you very much for sharing your journey.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all. Glad to do it.
Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.
All
Bye.
right.
Okay.
Oh,
All right, take
Richard,
care.
Yes.
before we go,